Bill Becker, you need to be quiet, it's my turn.
She's brave and she's bold.
That's it.
That's it.
Okay. Again, I think that just a representation of you all being here is a big tribute to our Carpetbaggers. And first I want to say I am so proud of you four that are here. Hewitt Gomez is our president.
Yes.
Eugene Polinsky in the back is our vice president. Robert Holmstrom is my dad. Howard Polari is right over there. Again, thank you for your service, seriously.
They can't see you, but you can see.
I just found out something today. I didn't know that there was only 600 carpetbaggers to start. I was thinking it was thousands. That makes it even more remarkable to me. You started off small in numbers and you just did such amazing, amazing things. Again, I want to remind you not to shake your table too much. We don't want anything precious. I hope your food was delicious and that your stay here has been good. And I'm glad that we have our guests here. If you're not from Minnesota, it's cold here. When I sent out the invitations, I lied. I talked about good weather, and it can be worse. So,
Kind of like England.
tonight we have some special people here. I just want to mention a few people that may not be speaking, but you will probably speak to them still during the rest of our reunion. Jerry Kaiser.
What?
Hi.
I didn't do anything.
Well, you did. Jerry Kaiser is going to be our special guest again tomorrow on the bus and History Center, but he was at the airport yesterday. And just to remind you, he does Twin Cities honor flights. This man is committed to helping veterans, and he does a fabulous job. I don't know where his vest is, but
It's right over there, but you don't forget the general here.
I'm getting to that. He is Sergeant Major, and Jenna, his beautiful wife, is Major General. And she is definitely his right-hand person when they do these honor flights. We've been on the honor flight, and they work tirelessly to see the veterans go to Washington, D.C. on these flights are just amazing. Jerry is also part of the veterans. I just lost my thought. Vietnam Veterans Charity, and he's also devoted to that. He is a Vietnam veteran himself. And I know there's one more thing. This is not a test. It's in your program.
I fly World War II.
Commemorative
I fly World War II airplane.
He does fly World War II airplanes. And he's also a member of the Commemorative Air Force, which hosted us yesterday. And in case you didn't know, or maybe you do, I forgot that it's in the program. Yesterday was totally donated by them. So, we also have Don Patton is going to speak to us a little bit here. He does our World War II Roundtable. He's a retired Army colonel, and he does also a fabulous job getting the stories out about the veterans, especially World War II. And I respect this man a lot. Him and I have tapped a few toes along the way here to get what we both want to make this a success. And I think we found a good bit on how it's gonna happen tomorrow. Just to make sure that you all know, we're doing a small round table at the History Center tomorrow. So, also, Chuck Schumann, he was at the airport yesterday, and you guys got to sign the wingtip of the B-25 Miss Mitchell, and that is quite a bird.
Yes, we do.
B-24 is kind of cool though. Anyway, he will talk more about that to us as well. So,
Yes.
Let's go ahead and start.
It is.
And we will go through this, and we've got some other fun things planned here. So,
Canisters ahead of you.
Chuck, are you first on there? Eric, I'm sorry.
Start in any order you wish.
No, you told me that you were the guy between the microphone and the dessert. The dessert is gone.
Oh,
so
right.
you're up. Eric, Brian.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jay. My guys already know it's a mistake to let me near a microphone. But it is an extreme honor to be here today to welcome you guys also to Minnesota, which is kind of my adopted state. My wife went to Brainerd High School and graduated from the state of Adelphus, that other Lutheran school in the state. And for those of you who are not here, there are two official Lutheran schools from the state. There's Gustavus Adolphus and St. Zero, which is St. Olav's, the Norwegian Lutheran school. So Gustavus Adolphus is the Swedish Lutheran school. So when she showed up at my house and she was wearing the Gusty t-shirt, it was nice that Dad let her in the house. It almost went over the line. So, but how I got here was in last year when the OSS Society received the Congressional Gold Medal. I had the honor of attending the ceremony. Luckily, my friend Matt here tipped me off and got me over the edge to come. So I was attending that because of a part of the organization that I am president of gave rise to the OSS operational groups that were Norwegian. So, as I like to say, the Army had 8 million men in World War II and 900 infantry battalions, but they took all the stubborn people and they put them in one, and they just happened to be Norwegian. It was just amazing. I don't know how they did that. But no, it was a very intentional mission to put the Norwegians together. But the OSS took advantage of that. They came by and drew 2 operational groups for OGs. And these are men that jumped into operations like Percy Red, Percy Pink, Adrian, Christopher, thanks to you guys and the men that you all represent. So I felt I was part of the deal. And I had met Matt the year before because his father had led the Norso group that sent the right team into Norway. So what I'm here for is because my passion is to tell those Norwegian Americans, those Norwegians, their story in World War II. I'm the president of an educational foundation that was created from the veterans group of that battalion. But I'll have to say that the happiest thing that I saw was a year ago when, back a second. Okay, so there I was, flat on my back. No, there I was at a table like one of these at a reception after the OSS medal was given out, and I am sitting with some of the gentlemen who are here tonight. And they're talking, and they mentioned that they were on the Norway missions when I mentioned Norway. And that got me thinking because I had just presented about 100 Norwegian medals to veterans of the 1st Special Service Force who also went to Norway in the same regiment as my father. And I got on the line with a friend of mine named Jens, and Jens, of course Jens, and he was kind enough to work with the Norwegian Embassy and work with the Norwegian military to produce those awards and present them to you, both at Palm Springs and awards to follow that took place after that. So that was a tremendous honor and privilege to be able to bring that recognition to you through the efforts of the foundation that I represent. But the absolute most exciting thing for me is last year, like tonight I have a table of folks who are here with me from my foundation and working with me, or suckers for the next members of my foundation. Well, I had a table last year, and two of the people at that table were brothers, and their father was Ron Wendt, or Seabart Wendt. Well, Seabart was in the aircraft that dropped its operators 60 kilometers inside of Sweden during the Wright mission. To show diversity, the Army actually put a Swede in the Norwegian battalion. It so happened that Ron Wendt and his team, the members on his aircraft stick that landed in Sweden, were interned in his hometown by the Swedish authorities. And then one day he actually saw his mother walking down the street, and he had to kind of hide because it was kind of confusing how he, a Swede, a neutral, was jumping out of airplanes to sabotage German trains in Norway. Yeah, got really complicated. But what really got me going was when I saw Bill Becker run across the room to embrace those two sons of Ron Wendt, because that bond was there between those Norwegians and you guys. So Bill, thank you. And it was a heartfelt thanks to be able to see that. But what I wanted to talk about for a second is intentionality in history. In 2011, my father was among veterans of the 99th who were invited to Washington, D.C. to receive medals from the embassy, through the embassy. And what I saw there was the first time I had ever really listened to my dad's story. Yada, yada, okay, Dad, got it, you were in the Army. At that point, I had been in the Army 30 years myself. And all of a sudden it started spinning, wait a minute, you were in the Army, but you were with a bunch of Norwegians. How do you do that? Well, I spent the next year at the National Archives trying to figure out that question. So I now have 3 filing cabinets of primary source that I have photocopied or had the foundation pay for to get photocopied. We have now collected the morning reports for the entire war for all 5 elements of the battalion. We have hundreds of clippings. We have 100 hours of oral history that has been recorded and collected by another member, actually by the president of the foundation, who was clever enough to find a sucker like me to pass that role on to. So he stood up the foundation, I took it over. But intentionality in history is how do we take the love, the devotion, the blood, sweat, and tears that went into creating this kind of organization, this kind of fellowship, and make sure that Thora here, Thora, raise your hand. Mom, raise Thora's hand. Thora, that Thora will be able to take advantage of that intentional history that we all leave behind. How collections like Matt's father's collection that had the orders that ordered the stick of soldiers that jumped out on D-Day with him, he still had it. He left it for his son. How do we get raw material like that available to the next generation's authors, to the next generation's interpreters of history? That's the challenge that I take very seriously in my foundation. That's why I built this table of people to engage and go forward and help me tell my story and tell our story. How to be intentional. So I was incredibly pleased when I heard a proposal yesterday night by one of the board members here of your organization to put together an educational foundation of your own. So I just want to say, my hat's off to you guys. Anything I can do to help you it'd be my honor, okay? Because you have an incredibly powerful story to tell, and very incredible feats that you perform. And don't let it get swept away in the big Air Force high altitude daylight story of World War II. You guys had a very, very special, different mission. And thank you for it. So, in wrapping up, for Thora is why I'm here, and to thank you for your service. Between my wife and I, we had 60 years service. We're both happily retired at this point, but service is something that I have trouble getting away from. So I'm happy to do anything I can for you. Cool. Thank you.
I know who he was.
Well, here we are. I'm Chuck Freeman. They've only given me about 10 minutes to say what I'd like to say. It's an hour and a half. It took me about 20 minutes just to warm up.
Get a little closer to the microphone, please.
Okay, Bob. But anyway, I am building a B-25J, and from being a laundry guy as long as I have been, I should be building the wrong airplane, it seems like. But if anybody is familiar with the B-25J, it's the mid-sized bomber, twin-engine mid-sized bomber, and it's got 1,750 horsepower engines on board. And we've got a gentleman back here that can tell you more about that if you're interested in talking about that. I took a set of plans that I bought about 6 years ago, and I started building it. And when I came to the jail, it just didn't seem to look right. And I've got over 100 pictures of that airplane. And just a few months ago, there's a guy named Larry at the Plumbing Field, and I helped with the restoration of this aircraft to put it in the air so it can be flown. And they do have flights that you can purchase on this airplane and to go up in. And we were going to take you guys up in this airplane, except the ceiling wasn't high enough. And they needed at least 1,000 feet, which we didn't have. And there was something happened to the left engine propeller, so we left it grounded. And but everybody had a good time anyway. And there's some more stories about some of the guys that were in a wheelchair for 15, 16 years that actually got up into this airplane. They helped them up out of a wheelchair, and they had 1 foot on the ladder going up into the B-25. And it's quite a maneuver. You got to crawl from the back to the front to get to the cockpit. So they found him sitting up he crawled up into the airplane and found him sitting there resting in the bomb bay area. And the next time they seen him, he wasn't there. Here he had gotten himself back down. This guy's been in a wheelchair for 15 to 16 years and never been out of the wheelchair. He had crawled up into the cockpit and was sitting in the captain's chair. I think it was the captain's chair, with a great big grin on his face about this big. And how he got up there, we have no idea. But the story goes, I'm sorry, I got to make this real brief. But once these guys, you get them outside, and some of the memories are real bad. and they don't even know what the name is at the time, and if you ask them and we knew they were World War II vets, and they don't even know that they were in the war. But you get them into that area down there, and these gentlemen and women, all of a sudden, they can tell you everything about that airplane and how it runs, and what you're talking about is not right. This is the way it went. And all of a sudden, their minds turn 20 and their bodies are 90. But all of a sudden, there was 3 or 4 wheelchairs down in Fleming Field this Tuesday. And these guys that were in those wheelchairs were walking around down at Fleming. I think you might have seen them down there. It was really interesting. It's kind of brought a tear to my eyes. But anyway, this airplane, make it short here. I started building this airplane probably about 4 years ago. And I've got some pictures. I brought my book in right here. And you can take a look and see the beginning of the construction and towards the end right here. It's getting pretty much ready for paint right now. And I'm hoping to fly this thing and next year. I have in August at Owatonna, Minnesota. And Jenny will let you know, and I'll let Jenny know. We'll keep in touch when this is going to be if you want to come up and see this take off. And I am going to invite a gentleman from Top Gun to put this thing in the air because of the characteristics of this airplane. I'm more of a Cub guy than I am this airplane. It's got, if it's heavy, and this one will be, when that plane is heavy, if you don't have enough airspeed on the ground, which is about 145 miles an hour, I believe, the tail will not be active. And they will roll over, and that's pretty much the end of it. And this plane will be heavy, and that's why I'm going to have, and if one engine should stall on takeoff, and even if you have enough airspeed, if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to lose it. And, but anyway, and also, when I started building this airplane, these plans said HNJ. At that time, I didn't really know there was about 7 different variations of this particular aircraft. And when I got to the tail part of this aircraft, and I started putting the tail together, I thought to myself, gosh, this just does not look correct. So basically, at 4 years now, we've taken over 100 pictures of this aircraft, so I can get the details of this aircraft and change it from the H to the J. And the J, right in front of the tail, it squares off. And Larry, here's this guy, not this guy, but the guy that worked on this airplane for over 30 years when they brought it back from Wisconsin when they first got it. He didn't even know that till just a few months ago when the hangar door was open this summer. And we looked at, I had a chance to look straight down the fuselage. And here, the fuselage flares out at the tail end because of the upper turret. And that allows a gentleman that's sitting, who's ever sitting in that tail guns, give him room to move around. And when I seen that, I looked at mine, and so that's why this doesn't look quite correct. Now, there's a long story why I can go through this and tell you some of the details, but so I decided to take the tail apart. I was going to maybe leave it, but I decided to take the tail all apart and build it according to the way this plane is, because it's all the graphics and everything are all the same. So that put me about 3 or 4 months behind on construction. I still should have it ready. So we're going to do our first test flights. Probably, I'm hoping, if everything goes correctly, I just stuck the radio system in it today. It's got 2 different radio systems. It's got working guns. Guns light up, turrets move, got a gun sound, got air brakes, it's got everything functions, and gun turrets turn and everything, just like the full-size B-25. And one of the videos that I ran out of time. but anyway, one of the videos, what I'm going to do is, this event is Warbirds and Classics in Owatonna. And they have it every year. It's the second week in August. And some of these warbirds, and I've got some pictures on my camera here. I wish I could show download them. This plane has got a 123-inch wingspan on it. And the fuselage, without the guns on it, is 96 inches long. And the tail will come up about, probably about 4 feet off the ground when the wheels are down. And the guns are 6 inches long. There's 2 in the front, 2 in the back, and 1 on each side. And so if you had 96 and you had another 6 inches of that, the fuselage is pretty big. and it's it's going to have all the antenna array, everything on it. One gentleman just gave me an idea to put a camera inside this B-25. So, and I just happen to have a camera that's about 8 inches long, and it's about the size of a cigar, that I used in one of my Cubs when I was flying that. I fly the classic version of when I fly down at Carpetbagger Classics. I've got a quarter-scale Cub that I use that I fly down there that I built. But we're going to at this event, we're going to have loudspeakers, and we're going to, we got an MC guy down there that talks about all the airplanes and describes them as they go up. And we got a down patrol, we fly all World War I airplanes down there. And that's quite a sight, because we get 19 airplanes in the air at the same time. That's what we had this last event. And it lasts for 4 days. And we have the color guards that come down there, and the cadets, and they put the flag up for us. And it's quite an event. And we're gonna, when B-25 comes out, when mine comes out, it's going to be, once it gets cleared for flight. And because of its weight, it's going to probably have to go through FAA inspections, because there's a limitation on UAFs, unmanned aircraft. So once that gets all cleared, we are going to take and fire this thing up and turn the smoke on the left engine, which is characteristics of this airplane, I guess. And we're going to fly it in a ghost formation flight. And we're going to, as we're flying it, we're got a CD that we're going to play. And I think that, Jenny, can you help me out with the name of that? That's In the Mood, from Glenn Miller is going to be playing while we read off the names of the people on the wingtips that you signed on Tuesday. Those wingtips that you signed are part of this B-25 that's going to be flown. And it's going to be flown in your honor. And we had 23 or 24 guys and gals from Waverly Gardens up in North Oaks that are on this wingtip also. And Bob's got his signature's on this. He's number 1 actually, the first signature on the wingtip. And after that, then they're kind of all over the place. But they're going to read off the names, and once the names are read off, and then we'll put the airplane up in the air and roll it up into the cloud, and I'll be touching the hand of God. Then we'll land the airplane, and once the airplane is on the ground and shut down, I will be defueling it, and we will be putting some after-run oil in the engines. We'll be pulling the plugs on it, put after-run oil in the engines. And then after that, it's going to be hung at Fleming Field in your honor. All the names are going to be on it, and they can't wait. They can't wait to see this thing. hanging up down there. And that's where it's going to be parked from there on in. It's going to have one flight, and that's going to be its first and last flight.
Well, thank you for including me. My name is Don Patton. I graduated from Texas A&M Hewitt, and I had a little arm wrestle here as an LSU guy. We'll have a end of season competition coming up this year. But graduated from Texas A&M, spent 30 years in the military, in the real service, the Army. But I have to concede, I have a son who graduated from the Air Force Academy, is now in his 25th year, and he was in the first F-15s flying over Afghanistan after 9/11, so I'm quite proud of him. He is currently the Deputy A5 for the Air Force Command in Europe and Africa, so don't get to see my grandkids as often with them being in Europe. But any effort to enhance the patriotism of our country is so important, whether it be Jerry's or Eric's efforts. My efforts are a little bit different, as I've run this World War II roundtable, and I do have schedules on the table here, and I will be conducting the oral history program tomorrow at the History Center at 11 o'clock. And Jenny and I have coordinated that with the deputy director. But World War II was a very important time. If you think about that period, we went from biplanes to jets. First used rockets. How common is that today? The use of computers first came in at that time. And of course, World War II ended up with the explosion of an atomic bomb. So if you think about that brief period of 6 years from 39 to 45, it was such an unbelievable advancement in technology, advancement in our cultures, and impacts on us today. One of the things that Jenny put in your little welcome package that caught my attention, there was a can of Spam. You know, that's a Minnesota thing. But every year I lead, and for the last 20 years I've led tours to Europe to visit the battlefields. And I led a tour to Russia several years ago. And in the Russian Military Museum in Moscow, they have several cans of Spam. And it is reported that Stalin said if it hadn't been for Spam, that the Russian army and civilians might have starved to death. So that came out of Minnesota. But several other things that have significance that you may not be aware of, those of you that are from not from this area. The first shot for the United States was fired from the USS Ward, which was manned by a reserve naval unit at Pearl Harbor. They actually sunk a submarine an hour and a half before the air attack at Pearl Harbor, and the groggy officer of the day didn't believe that there was anything happening. You know, it's a Sunday morning. But as you drive by, if you have a chance tomorrow, on the west end of the Veterans Building over at the state capitol, the gun that sunk that submarine is on the Capitol grounds that you'll be driving by tomorrow. Most people have followed the exploits of the B-25s, the mission that Jimmy Doolittle flew in April of 42. Those B-25s were modified here in St. Paul at the airport here, the airport that most of you flew into. Another thing that happened very close to where those B-25s were modified is a company built gliders, the CG-4 gliders, which if you were an attorney, you'd put hazardous duty on them today. But Minnesota was the second largest manufacturer of gliders in World War II. The most prolific builder of gliders was the Ford Motor Company up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And I talked to someone here about that today. If you remember, Ford Motor Company built what they called a Woody station wagon in the 30s. And Ford converted its Woody station wagon assembly line into building gliders, and built over 5,000 up there. From a military standpoint, associated very much with what Eric is doing with his special forces, and of course with the special operations forces that you're familiar with. The 1st Ranger Battalion, they call it Darby's Rangers, came out of the 34th Division, which was the National Guard Division for Minnesota and Iowa. And I used to remember, I think it was like 70% of that 1st Battalion came out of Minnesota and Iowa. And they had reunions here for many years. It was so successful in the northern invasion of Africa that they then expanded it to have 2 other Ranger battalions to make a regiment. And of course, then they activated 2 other battalions that came into Pont de Hoc in the D-Day landings. Another great event that you will actually drive by tomorrow afternoon when you go to the historic fort. There are some brick buildings there as you drive up to the fort. That was the Japanese language school. When many of you recall that a fellow named Stassen, Harold Stassen, ran for president many times, but he was governor of Minnesota. He was one of the youngest governors ever elected. He gave up his governor position to become the administrative officer for Admiral Halsey. I had Stassen speak to our program twice, once about being on Halsey's staff, and the other was about his 2 great memories. One is he went into Japan and liberated the prisoner of war camps, and so many of the prisoners of the Japanese were from Minnesota, because if any of you are from the Brainerd area, the 194th Tank Battalion, one of the companies, was from the Brainerd National Guard Armory there. They were in the Bataan Death March, and again were liberated by Stassen. He was appointed by Roosevelt to be our representative at the UN Charter Commission by FDR, and after FDR's death was reappointed by President Truman. Another event of great significance, but in some ways a small unit, the Military Railroad Command was activated here in the Twin Cities. I can't tell you, but it was an office building in downtown St. Paul, and Fort Snelling became one of the many training grounds for developing that military railroad that operated in all the countries around the world. And something else of great pride, if anybody's interested, I should have brought it in with me from the car, but President George H.W. Bush, Bush 1, he soloed at the airport here. So at the airport here, where the Doolittle planes were modified with extra fuel tanks and stripped of extra weight. The gliders were built, and George Bush did his solo. Just a brief word on our roundtable. We are finishing our 33rd year. I actually have schedules here if anybody is interested. And we have prominent historians come in. And for the last 20 years, I've led battlefield tours. I just got back from leading a tour to Normandy for the 75th anniversary. And next year I'm leading a victory tour we're going to actually follow from Luxembourg to Flossenburg, where Bonhoeffer died, and then down to Berchtesgaden and Munich, where the Nazis had their last battles. But if any of you have interested, I would love to help any of you promote a roundtable in your area. Again, we have to keep with the drawdown in the small size of our military today. We need to support our military, and we need to keep the heritage of people like the Carpetbaggers alive in our history and in our memories. Thanks for having me.
Jenny has been given some pins, and they basically refer to Sussex 1944, and so we did a little homework this afternoon. And the Sussex Plan was a operation that ran from January to September of 1944. Basically, it was an intelligence operation, and it was shared between the OSS, the French Intelligence Bureau, and this operation dropped a officer-in-chief and a radio operator, and the commanders of this operation were Kenneth Cohen for the SIS English. There was Colonel Francis Pickens for the OSS, and there was a Colonel Gilbert Denault, he went by Remy, Colonel Remy, for the BCRA, which is the French intelligence. And there were 120 agents, 118 men and 2 women, and their mission was to supply updated information, independent facts, and reliable and accurate information to the Allied General Headquarters in order to make relevant decisions in the upcoming Normandy and Market Garden and all of the special operations into Germany. They came up with a Sussex badge. We're going to present a Sussex badge to each of the living carpetbaggers. Eisenhower and Churchill planned the invasion in Europe in early '43. I don't think the Carpetbaggers started off until late '44 or early '44. But they needed information on German troop movements and other surveillance facts. They were particularly interested in northern France. The British created MI6, and the Sussex Plan was used to gather information to assist planning for D-Day. And 3 recruited French citizens who spoke fluent French. The teams of 2 were dropped into France, mission chief and radio operator. They were looking for safe houses, drop sites. These pathfinders received and dispatched agents to the various areas that they needed intel on. They had 12 Sussex agents that were captured and executed. 7 were deported, and only 4 were able to return. And they had an agent who was pretty famous. She was Jeanette Gaillot, I guess it's spelled G-U-Y-O-T. But she received the USA's Distinguished Service Cross, the France's Legion of Honor, the Croix de Guerre Palms, France's Medal of Resistance, and the English George Medal. You took it?
Yeah.
Oh, the Sussex pin depicts it's got Sussex 44 above, shows a parachute with the French resistance sign in a field of a British on the right, American flag on the left, and the French flag in the middle. And we're going to present that. So if Jenny, would you go ahead and present that to...
So we gave them to the Carpetbaggers.
Oh, you've already done it?
And then we went to the speakers.
Oh, okay. So, Eric, Dawn,
Where is that already?
the French Remy, Colonel Remy, yes. So,
Is that written up at all?
I Googled it. Right off of Google.
You sound like my son, Google it.
Well, you know, I went to college, and I used to have to walk out of the fraternity, go to the college library, pull out the index card, look it all up. And now, my daughter just graduated from Oregon State about 3 years ago, and all she had to say was, okay, Google, and it popped up, and you can cross-check it, and technology is wonderful. It's like these carpetbaggers, you know, when they flew in World War II, they had celestial navigation, they had their maps, they had their landmarks on the land that they would fly, or they had the radio beam, which everybody had. And we went down to Pensacola, and the 492nd U.S. Air Force opened its carpetbagger operation in Pensacola, and these 100-year-old carpetbaggers are down there, and their guys are showing them their GPS, their satellite guidance. They got Ospreys and C-130 Spectres with, you know, automatic lights and stuff. It's just amazing. But technology is fantastic, and that's where I took it from, right off Google, and you can look it right up, and it even has a picture of the pin in the Google article. So it's all there. So thank you very much.
Jenny, could I have 2 minutes?
You betcha. Well, you betcha, that's a Minnesota.
No, I should have told this story, how I got introduced to the Carpetbaggers. There was a publisher in Texas by the name of Ed Aiken. He published a lot of Texas history, and again, I mentioned I grew up in Texas. And I used to go to his publishing house with some frequency. And one day in the 90s, he had a book called The Carpetbaggers by a guy by the name of Ben Parnell. He gave me Ben Parnell's address by Waco, Texas. Ben gave me the name of Sebastian Courier. Do I pronounce that right?
Courier.
Courier.
That's his son.
And I know, we talked yesterday. That's what really this jogged me. But I can't even remember the year. It was probably in the late 90s. But between Sebastian and Ed and Ben, our roundtable did a carpetbagger program. And Jenny, I think we found 8 carpetbaggers in this area at that time. We ended up with a fellow by the name of Leif Eide, who had been in Joe. We ended up with a fellow whose name I can't remember that lived in Cottage Grove, who had been the guy that prepared the Joes to be sure that they had the money and the weapons to drop out of the plane. The operations officer, and I can't remember which of the unit he was operations for. He was a major. He lived in Plymouth, Minnesota, and we had Bob, we had Nancy's dad on the program. We found eight carpetbaggers, remarkably. I can tell this story now because neither one is here, but the operations officer I mentioned that lived in Plymouth, he had agreed to be on the program to tell his story, but then when I told him that this Leif Eide was going to be on the same program, he says, I can't come. For some reason, they had the same girlfriend. But I've had such a great admiration for the Carpetbaggers for this now 25 years or so. And again, I just repeat my comments. You have a special heritage, and I really encourage you to keep this up because it is special. Thanks.
Was one of those gentlemen's name Ed Erickson from St. Paul?
No, he lived in Plymouth,
Okay,
but I do remember Erickson.
yep. He came to one of my dad's, when we did the documentary, and he was talking about how they had to dump a bunch of weight really fast. And they found out later that it was all diamonds.
They were summarily arrested and interviewed every day for 2 weeks, and then they were returned to active duty. The story didn't change.
Can we get Bill on yet?
Oh, you want to?
Yeah.
Okay, this is new. You want to go on?
Everything's new. We're going
Okay,
in.
well, hey, I'm fine with the deal. This technology is a wonderful thing. Bill got to see all the.
Tom, do you have your, thank you. So, we want to honor our heroes again tonight, and I thought it'd be kind of fun to just go around the room and either ask questions, because I want people to, we all have questions. And if we don't ask the questions,
Hello, Bill.
we're not going to know the answers. The history books don't have them.
Jenny asked me to get you on
And,
the phone, so hang on for
we're
a
getting in
second.
trouble.
I have no.
Okay.
Keep me out of the next one, okay?
Are you talking to me, Bill?
I'm talking to a friend of mine here.
Oh, okay. Talking to a friend, not us.
We're not.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Jenny.
So, I am curious to hear from
I'm
the
putting the speaker to the
Carpetbaggers
phone here.
what their most memorable thing was about what they did.
Bill,
I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to think about
Jenny
it.
is asking what the most memorable event during your Carpetbagger experience that you can relate to the family gathering here.
The most memorable?
Yes.
Having a squadron of B-24s flying over all the tables.
Yeah, that's happening. You're peeking. Let me switch views. You don't need to look at me. Hang on, we'll go away. There you go. Okay, you can see your squadron now. So, okay, most memorable. They're wanting to know. All the Carpetbaggers are going to give their most memorable recollection of the Carpetbagger experience. So,
In case anybody doesn't understand what we're doing, our boss is still in California.
And it reminds me,
There we go.
are you there?
yep.
It reminds me of that many planes taking off in the evening and hoping that that many planes are going to come back in the morning.
Yep. Any stories you want to talk about? Any missions?
Bill?
Well, I can't hear what she's saying.
Do you have anything you want to mention about any particular missions or anything that you remember?
The one mission that is deep in my mind is the one going into Norway.
Then tell us. Eric wants to hear.
And having to get caught in a field. Is everybody watching this?
Yes, they're listening to you. So please talk to them.
This was one going into Norway, getting caught in, making our drop and getting caught in a field. And the only way we could get out of that field was to circle around the walls of the field. Fortunately, our bombardier, Herb Adams, was guiding the pilot to make his move, and he moved 2 feet, moved 2 feet, moved 3 feet. We finally got out of that. When we finally got back to England, there were branches at the bottom of our plane, in the bomb base. It was one of the roughest missions. We almost turned ourselves to Sweden.
All right, Jenny, anything else?
Thank you. Bill, can you still hear if we were talking at the microphone?
Can you hear us on the microphone?
What's that?
Can you hear us on the microphone?
I'm still on the microphone?
Can you hear? Can you hear Jenny talking?
Can you hear me talking, Bill?
Okay.
Hand it to Gene. and see
Okay,
if he can-
so we're gonna go around the room. Why don't you start with Gene there and see what he has to say about his,
Okay.
he's right behind you. to
Okay,
your
Bill,
left.
we're going to talk with Gene
Behind
behind
you.
me.
Fine.
I had to clear with Gene.
I was way over here.
Okay.
Give him the mic. Give him the mic.
But yeah.
Are we still talking to Bill or are we talking?
No, we talk about you.
Okay, I'm talking about me. I'll have to say that this is one of the most memorable days and one of the most memorable Carpetbagger events that I've had, because sitting at the table with me is Mark Coretta, who is the son of my tail gunner, Pete Coretta, and my whole crew is gone except me. And it was a great occasion for me.
Hey, what? Did you cut me off?
No, Bill, I'm trying to get you back on.
Anyway.
Did you hang up?
I could make lots of clues to all the conversations that have gone on here because they kept reminding me of different things. When Ben Parnell came here, he and his wife really enjoyed these sessions, and we enjoyed being with Ben Parnell on his first book, the Carpetbagger's first book, and he put out a second book with a correction because he had me dead in the first book. And I happen to be a lot closer to that right now. But I'm still kicking.
Yeah.
And I want to kick also about Norway. There are connections to practically everything that's happened this evening. And there are connections. This is a family to me. This is our Carpetbagger family, which I did not know overseas, because this is a very peculiar question, Jenny. What do you remember most memorable? When we were told to forget everything.
Yeah.
And we did.
Uh-huh.
But there are an awful lot of memories,
Bill,
and there are an
I'm
awful
trying to
lot
get
of
you on.
treasures among all of you people, and I'm afraid I could go on at length, but I won't. Here, Buck.
Sorry. There.
One of our planes coming out of Norway was shot down over this little island above someplace over there in the North Sea. And as a navigator, I was selected to pick up those bodies with an engineer. And When I got there were 5 bags with hands sticking out of it of some of our people. We put them in this airplane, and the engineer that was in charge was making sandwiches, and he asked me if I wanted one. I said sure. So I went back there, and he was sitting on one of the bodies in the body bag. I didn't want the sandwich after that. It was just horrible. The smell, you know. But war is hell, and we went through a lot of stuff like that that wasn't pleasant. Other than that, I enjoyed my tour as a navigator. And as Bill Becker mentioned a while ago, we had a close call and came back with the limbs in our ailerons by hitting top of a tree, by circling around it, as he mentioned. And other than that, it was pretty much fun.
In March or April of 1945, the war was winding down, and my crew was sent over and flew down the Danube River. Now, we were supposed to drop 15 packages of pigeons in a box like a Quaker Oats oatmeal box. And we were flying at 500 feet, and it had a barometric fuse on each box that would explode at 100 feet and let the pigeons land safely, and the Patriots would pick them up. But that wasn't the idea. The idea was we were fooling the Germans and giving them some false information, because they found the pigeons. And that led up to some of the surrender documents, and probably ended the war a little bit earlier. But the most memorable thing was we were flying down the river, and my pilot, James Bingham, banked the airplane 90 degrees, and I'm looking out the bottom of the airplane, and the castle is higher than our airplane. And the dead of night, you could not see anything else, but the castle was right in the moonlight, and it was spectacular. You know, we all made it back safe, and that happened. And the next best thing to coming back was when they come back to England and see the White Castle, White Cliffs of Dover. We really loved that. It was, the sun was coming up, and we could see that from a long ways away. Thank you.
I'm Bill. It's Howard Pollery. I was asked to the most memorable moment of experience as a carpetbagger, I guess, was on a mission to Norway. We had made our drop, and after the drop, we were headed back home across the coast. And the pilot complained about the fact that the controls were very hard to operate, and he asked me to go back and see if I could find out what the problem was. I climbed back into the forward bomb bay, and lo and behold, we had a mechanical malfunction so far as the release of one of the packages. The center package that wouldn't release, and the top package had hit it and rolled over on top of it and against the controls, running up and down the side of the bomb bay. Without thinking, I straddled the opening over the catwalk on the side of the plane, and I gave it the package a jerk that was hung up, and at the same time the package that was hung up released, and both packages went right down through the Bombay doors and into the North Atlantic. I was straddling over an open Bombay, which I, without thinking, I just turned back and climbed back into the cockpit and told the pilot that I had found the problem, but we launched 2 packages and a Bombay door. We made it back to England without any further ado. Take care, Bill.
Well, I think unless anybody has anything else.
Over here. I got a
Okay.
Talk to you. I hate using hand mics. I have an update. Yesterday, Katie was kind enough to tell us about an event that's occurring next summer in England, and this is August 15th. August 15th at Hereford. Harrington, thank you, Hereford. wrong kind of cow. Well, that kind of tied into another conversation, and I ended up sending a message to my counterparts in Norway that I communicate with, and a mutual friend of ours, Clive, out of Harrington. And in a discussion about the O'Hara aircraft's crash on an island of Selfjord, I sent your collective greetings to Clive and well wishes to the municipal leaders on the island to tell them that that aircraft and the memorial that community raised in memory of the O'Hara crew was remembered here today. I got a rousing return, and there are a number of Norwegians that will be willing to meet you at that event next August because they want to meet the Carpetbaggers in person.
I don't remember the date.
Also, I understand November 15th, Harrington will be rededicating our memorial. Is that correct?
November 10th.
November 10th. So get your airplane tickets right now. Just stay until August 15th and you'll be good to go. So our memorial has deteriorated and they've totally redone it. And so we have made sure that that's taken care of, so we rededicate it.
And I believe at this time in November, there won't be any Carpetbaggers, but in talking with Bill Becker the other day, we're probably going to do one in the spring or early summer. So whether we get closer to the July 18th or go over, but Bill was talking about a rededication with actual Carpetbaggers present in the spring of next year. So that's what I just wanted to add. And ladies and gentlemen, I don't know how many hours, minutes, months that Jenny's been working on this, but I'd like to congratulate her for a fantastic reunion and all the hard work. And Lorraine, yes, there we are. She will take the mic.
So we just wanted to thank you because every great air crew needs a good ground crew. And you believe in the ground crew. We couldn't do it. helpers on the ground. And so,
right here is one of them.
So Trudy, could you stand up, please? Nancy, could you stand up, please? And Mary, could you stand up, please? Yeah, Mary. And Jenny's partner in crime is Bart.
One last thing. I'm going to memorize all of your faces. This is a family. I welcome you new people to us. I feel like this is a very strong-knit family, and I'm just telling you, I'm memorizing your faces, and you're gonna get emails, and I'm gonna be taking your pictures, whether you like it or not, and next time we get together, we're gonna do it again, okay? Thank you so much.